Anybody who really knows me in the collectibles or Pokemon space knows that, yeah, it's a business, but it's also very personal to me. That's not a lazy answer to say, give me your money, let's just keep making me profits in that respect. The Pokemon element is a rather interesting story. I'm sure that's what we want to talk about next, maybe just touch base on that.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the 1% Podcast. I'm your host, Vin, and
I'm Shane.
Today we have a very special guest with us. We have our man, Nick Mills, here today, and we're going to dive into his life, his business, and really get to know the man, behind the camera. So, Nick, welcome. Good to see you.
Hey, thanks, man. Thanks, Shane. I appreciate y'all. I appreciate you guys having me.
Awesome. Well, Shane, you brought us this great guest. I would love for you to lead in the best way that you can. Paint Nick as an amazing man for our viewers.
For those of you guys that have been following this podcast for a little while, you guys know that I have a decent size collection of cards. When it ranges to sports cards, Pokemon cards, Yu-Gi-Oh cards, I thought I was a pretty good top dog here. And then I met Nick. And, Nick really put me into my place for the size of collection here. But it's not just the cards that we're going to be talking about today. Nick is a CFO, and we're gonna pick his brain about how he got there. His mantra that he currently lives in life. So he's a phenomenal guy. To be honest, I think he's not as arrogant as I want him to be because of his badass collection and how he got there. He's a very humble person, so I'm trying to light that little fire under him. But very, very humble guy, and Nick. Yeah, I just can't thank you enough for being here with us.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So Nick, tell us, we want to get right into you, man. Tell us a little bit about how you grew up. What was that like for you, and how did that inspire you to start getting into the industry, your hobbies? What was that like?
Oh man, well, I mean that's quite a chasm there to go against. I mean, originally from Dallas, Texas, born and raised. I moved to Cleveland, Ohio, actually for middle school to pursue the sport of wrestling. Wrestling was a very large part of my life and has dictated quite a lot of the places I've lived. After graduating high school, I went on to wrestle Division I in New York City. I went to Columbia University, graduated in 2013, and then hung up my wrestling shoes, decided it was time to find out what that career was going to be for me. I had a lot of different avenues I was exploring, as an 18 to 22 year old, you think you know what it is you want, but you really don't learn that, I think, until later in life. But worked in New York City for a little bit, worked at Mount Sinai, was a lab manager there at Epigenetics Oncological Lab. Still trying to figure out what I wanted to do. My ultimate decision was to go back to grad school. I think that's the easy deferral of I still don't know what to do. So I went to grad school at The Ohio State University, where I got my master's in healthcare administration with a focus on healthcare economics, healthcare finance. And it took me to Columbus, Ohio, where I found a mortgage, a wife, a house, and that's where I currently reside today. Career-wise, ever since grad school, it's been healthcare focus. I had a short stint after graduation at Ohio Health, which is a large healthcare system here in Central Ohio. It's a very big player, very competitive with Ohio State from the medical perspective. And then took a job at Google. To be specific, Verily, which is an Alphabet company. Google and Verily, for example, Waymo, YouTube, all owned and operated under the Alphabet umbrella. I was the CFO for one of their joint ventures. Their CFO for about maybe four to 5 years. It was called 115. It was a group-led effort between Google and various other stakeholders in the central Ohio, Dayton area of Ohio. And then now I'm at CVS Aetna. I'm the CFO for a medium-sized health insurance plan, and so that's the boring shtick, or that's the corporate side, the day-to-day, the 9 to 5 of where my life is started and where I guess it's currently at. The Pokemon element is a rather interesting story. I'm sure that's what you want to talk about next, maybe just touch base on that?
Well, I definitely got a thing or two to say and ask
Oh, sure,
before we do.
absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I love that you're in New York. So first up, my dad went to Columbia. He graduated
Oh,
from
very
there.
cool. Okay.
Yeah, and then I mean, I live in New York, so I've been here my whole life.
Okay.
So you're in my hometown, which is awesome.
Was formerly in
Was.
New York, right? In Columbus now.
That's awesome. So what you said that wrestling was a big part of your life, and you were
Huge.
traveling a little bit from that. Can you tell us, expand on that? I'm just curious because
Oh,
wrestling's an interesting sport.
Yeah, wrestling is a very interesting sport. I mean, I'm a pure advocate for it, just simply for the life lessons that you can take from it if you really apply yourself. My father didn't go to college. He was a Marine, joined the Corps 6 days after he graduated high school. And my mom also was not a college graduate. And why I mention that is because my father always wanted me to get formal schooling, go to university or go to college. And, he didn't want me to be a laborer like he was, right? So he just always pushed sport and always pushed grades. Typical, good old American dream, style things, right? Football was my sport. I love football. Born in Texas, football was king. But when I moved to Ohio, wrestling was something I picked up to stay in shape for football. But it was something that I was pretty good at, I guess, right? It's something that I really enjoyed. It was hard, but I enjoyed it. And then doors started to open. I went to a private all-boys school for high school. That was not because my father was looking at all the private boys schools in Ohio for his son to go to. Not at all. I was in inner city public schools leading up to this transition to this, elite private boys academy in Cleveland, Ohio, which is named University School, US for short. But my pursuit wasn't necessarily education. It was really sport. Sport was the leading me to education, right? And so the high school coach saw me wrestle a few times, spoke to my dad. My dad said, kick rocks. We can't afford that. We live in Akron. There's so many barriers to do this. But that coach was very persistent and very helpful. And he ultimately persuaded my father to allow us to move up there. We really lifted our entire lives. It's just me and my father, by the way. And yeah, so I pursued wrestling in high school. I was very successful at it. It was a multi-time state placer in the state of Ohio. Got looks from Division I colleges. I took visits at UVA, Bucknell, Princeton, Harvard, and Columbia, and ultimately leveraged the sport of wrestling in the pursuit of further education, which I knew ultimately was going to be my career path and trajectory. It wasn't going to be the sport of wrestling that was going to set me apart in the future. It was really, using that in a way that, and putting in the time to gain, a true education, from my mindset. So
love that.
I have a few questions leading into a different direction. The people that we normally talk to, and I would say probably about 70% of people who actually get their degrees, they end up doing something else in life.
Yeah.
So how did you decide on this degree and this career path? And do you have plans on opening up your own company? Are you planning on doing it yourself? Do you plan on, what are the aspirations and milestones here? What's the plan?
So my undergraduate degree, it was actually molecular biology. Pre-med was my track. I took all the physics, I took calculus, I took all the chemistry, all the biology courses, all the associated labs, all the prerequisites that would have ultimately landed me going to med school. And accompanying that was a Spanish minor. I love the language of Spanish. I think that there are billions, I know there are billions of people in this world. And to really be immersed in their culture and to understand, language, no matter what it is, if it's Spanish or if it's Greek or if it's Italian or if it's Chinese, you really have to understand language, I think, to really, immerse yourself in it. So Spanish was my choice. I always found the idea of being a bilingual, emergency room physician, but that was my pipe dream at one point in time. But as I started the conversation today, you're 18 years old. The college system expects you to know what it is you want to do, for the rest of your life, and you've only lived maybe 20% of it, if you're lucky, of your life to date to make this big decision for the rest of your life. So anyways, a lot of pivots for me. So molecular biology and Spanish, I worked in a lab for some time. I had a few publications, never a primary author, but secondary. We were in Nature Communications, other various journals. I think New England Journal of Medicine as well. There's a publication out there with my name on it as a secondary, tertiary, quaternary. I don't recall how far down the chain I was, but then I used grad school as my pivot, right? So med school, it wasn't what I ultimately wanted. I think I knew that early on, but I finally decided that. My dad, needless to say, I think was a little disappointed. I think he thought that I was, underachieving where he should see me in life. And I think his pinnacle was a physician. But for me, it just didn't end up being that way. And so I used grad school to pivot, focused on, economics, healthcare. Healthcare is oftentimes the first or second largest employer in any city in the United States. Job security was important to me. Having a versatile skill set, being finance, so it was transferable across industry. I wasn't limited to healthcare. So those are the things that went through my mind when deciding on my master's degree in healthcare administration.
So job security, going the safe route, but still having that, I guess the background in, I want to say almost like pharmaceutical as economics. The CFO position, I feel like that's completely different. And going with the actual Alphabet company. Is it Alphabet's? I know Google is owned by the Alphabet company, right?
Yes, Alphabet's the umbrella in which Google, Verily, Waymo, Calico, all those, YouTube is housed underneath the Alphabet umbrella. Yeah.
So how did you get there? I'm just generally curious, especially from, it sounds like it was a startup venture, right?
It's a little probably too complicated to go too far down the weeds. And that's not because I don't want to share, but mostly just the timing and complexity issue. But what transpired was, and Malcolm Gladwell will say it best. I mean, we really, it's those loose connections that oftentimes lead to life-changing opportunities. It's not your best friend that brings you along. It's that guy that, you sold a Pokemon pack to, right? And he knows you're a good guy, and he's like, hey, how about this? Next thing you know, you're talking about something, and an opportunity may present itself. So it's those loose connections. That's the answer to your question in short of how I ended up, at Verily Life Sciences. And that's because a former colleague of mine, one I really respect, she's older than me, but she knew the work ethic I had, my work product, how I, managed myself. And so she worked there. She got a job there as being a large CEO of a behavioral health provider, a tech-centric behavioral health provider trying to be cutting edge, next level for behavioral health and substance use disorder solutions. And she goes, I know a guy. So I was that guy. I had a conversation with them. They hired me on. I ultimately left the position because that same colleague left her position. She went to work at CVS Aetna for a mid-sized health insurance plan. And she tapped me once again. Funny story to that, I don't have any background in insurance. People say healthcare and it's just kind of a catch-all, insurance, right? Absolutely not. There are, it's a three-legged stool, really, the government, health insurance company, and then health providers, right? That's kind of the three-legged stool in this environment. And the one leg being health insurance is not one I had experience with. So I got my foot in the door with her good graces, and the hiring manager, the senior vice president within Aetna, gave me about 10 minutes. She gave me a 10-minute block because she's like, I look at this guy's resume, he's not the one for this position. I got in the room with her. She barked at me for 10 minutes straight. I mean, there was no platitudes. There was no hellos, no nothing. I think her first question to me was, what do you know about IBNR? And the acronym itself means incurred but not reported. It's an actuarial term to use for reserving against, health plan liability, because you don't know what you owe to providers until they bill you, right? So you have to have some sort of actuarial adjustment to estimate that. Anyways, I know it now. But at the time, though, I think I waffled through it as best I could. Blah, blah, blah. She kept barking at me. 10 minutes were up. She said, thanks for the interview. And I said at the end of it, and I think this is what made my ultimately was offered the position, which I'm currently holding. I told her, I said, you've been asking me questions for 10 minutes straight. I haven't had an opportunity to ask any questions of my own. And that took her aback, I think, in I think it was like an eye roll, but also a sign of respect. She said, you're right. Let's do half an hour today. Of course, I'm still working during my day, but I'll make it work, because I'm interested in this job. And that 30-minute call lasted about 100 minutes. And so it ended with her ultimately offering me the job here at CVSF. So
we might have to have a quick second podcast with Nick on his interviewing skills here, just for our listeners. I love it.
That's good, man. You flip the script, ask some questions, and I think that's the interesting thing. When people are looking to hire for a high quality position, they want to know that somebody's a good, I guess, just insightful, right? They're good. They ask questions. They're curious. They want to know. That's actually one of the big topics we talked about in our previous podcast. It's like staying curious. Because if you're curious, there's a level of power, and it commands so much importance with it.
Yeah, I mean, that is not on my list of mantras, but it's definitely something I believe in. I mean, having an open mind and continuing to learn about things you do not learn about or you are uncomfortable about is something that will always set you apart, whether it's, somebody seeing that you're interested or whether like showing them that, how your mind works, but also showing intrigue for understanding what you don't understand. Because a lot of people will put blinders on. I mean, I know what I do best. I don't need to hear that stuff. That doesn't matter to me. It's like, well, it's going to make you not only a more well-rounded person, but it's also going to show mutual respect that you have an interest in something that somebody's speaking about, right? And to then actually absorb it, that's the next level. I mean, in one ear, out the other. You can be a nodding, oh, yes, like, oh, that guy was really nice. He listened. But if you actually listen, there's so many things that you can learn from so many people if you're open to it.
Yeah, it's funny because there's this great book that I delved into called About Behaviorism, because a lot of people have very interesting misconceptions about what behaviorism actually is. So Skinner, who's the founding father of behaviorism, found it important to go back and actually write a book on what behaviorism is so that people can understand. And in there, in one of the chapters, he goes over the differences between hearing and listening, seeing, and then actually like visualizing what's in front of you, because we can get caught up in these subconscious processes without even realizing it, right? Like so many people will listen, but then they have these internal monologues and they don't hear, or they're just listening to belt out an answer. And so again, they're forgetting to actually hear what's being said. So I think that's really important that you bring that point to the listeners.
For sure. Yeah.
I love it. Shane, what was one of the biggest questions you wanted to ask our man Nicholas here today? I know that you were definitely curious about what was it, related to his role, or was it on Pokemon cards? I know you got a lot of questions.
Pokemon card.
I mean, it's so tough because, like I said, I just like that interview. I feel like I can just keep Nick on here all day, and I kind of want to. I just want to turn off the cameras and just talk to him. He's a great guy. Before we jumped onto this podcast, we talked about the 1%, and and Nick immediately said, "Well, I'm not in the 1%. I'm more in the 5 to 7% club." I'm like, "Get out of here." And I was telling him, I said,
inclusive of my wife, I want it to be known to get to that 5 to 7 echelon.
And if that doesn't scream out, Nick, that's once again, it's just kind of every single layer here of humbleness and humility. But I think now that we've talked about this, the 1% is really, how do you make yourself the 1% when it comes to mindset, spirituality, a husband, a father, wealth? What does that phrase mean to you, the 1%? Just generally curious about that.
Sure. That's a good question. This is one you didn't prep me on. When I hear the 1%, actually, in my mind, and this is true, this isn't in I promise there's no coaching here behind the scenes interview preparation, but I do not think of like the top 1% wealth. I did at the outset whenever you asked me that, sure, because that's what I jump to when somebody else mentions it, right? But to me, whenever I hear it though, I think of marathons, right? Because the stat is, I think it's less than or close to 1% of the population in the world has run a marathon in their life. And so, I think this will snowball into answering your question, but I run 4, and that's not me to tout or to be lauded for. I did it because I needed goals. I did it because, my evenings were boring, right? I needed something to stimulate myself. Being a Division I athlete, you have this very, very, very regimented schedule. That really tests you through and through. But after I graduated, I wanted to have goals. And I ran my last marathon, I think 3 years ago. I think it was more recent. Oh, let's just call it 3 years. But 1% of the population, has completed that. And when you do complete a marathon, it's one of the most rewarding things in the world for me. And I've done a lot of things that, I felt very good about myself for. But when you really cross that finish line, no matter your time, that's not really what it's about. It's really just you've run 10, 15 marathons leading up to the ultimate marathon on race day, when you're just thinking about it in the terms of mileage. So it's like, what did you even do? But trust me, when you do cross that line, it's a sensational feeling. But all this to say is that, what makes somebody unique, right, or successful, no matter what industry segment, whether it's being just a father, whether it's being a successful business person, you have to have grit. You have to have vision. You have to be very open and accepting of failure, setbacks, but not everybody's made that way. And I could talk for hours about mother nature versus nurture, because I would argue that a lot of folks just aren't set up to be reactive to that, to feel failure and accept it for what it is and then move on. I mean, there's definitely elements that are inherent to an individual's success and how they approach things successfully. But then there's also an element too of a single father, who pushes his son, to go run 2 miles, do 3 sets of 20 dips, and then you can go out with your friends. I mean, that's just a whole different, maybe it's just a single dad, right, who has no mother there saying, you're crazy, let him go hang out with his friends. But I'm leading on to the fact that that's how I was raised. You don't get reward unless you put in work. It's not a give me or an entitlement. It must be earned. And so I carry that focus in my life. I always have, for better or for worse. I'm definitely a hard ass at times, which is reflective of my father. But I'm also a perceiver and somebody that's listening, and that's a product of my education, which my father didn't have, from the formal perspective. Columbia was great because it allowed me, it wasn't just the city of New York, which brings personalities, culture, and people together from all over the world. It really is the coming together of just different ways of being brought up as a human, which, my upbringing was very different, I think, than any of my colleagues or peers in school. So anyways, that to me, I think is what I think about when you say or ask me what the 1% is.
Well, I think you obviously have great morals. You got a good head on your shoulder. Your work ethic is clearly tremendous, and you are different. We normally talk to on this podcast it's one or the other, right? It's the 9-to-5ers, it's working for the man, or it's the entrepreneur, which they have different mindsets. And the fact that you are so successful at both, and that's what I think it's a good segue into this hobby that you've transitioned into a very successful business. It's how, right? And I think the morals and, that your father has helped instill, that the teachers, that everybody who has helped you get to where you are today, that is truly, you are the 1%. You are that exact person that, Vin and I talked to for this past year about this podcast. It's mindset, I really think, is the biggest thing here. And you've distilled such a good one. So getting to this, which is my most exciting topic. And yes, Nick, everybody knows that I'm getting out of cards. All right, I talked about that a couple months ago, but I will tell you that Nick does try to pull me back into the dark side. So how do you do it? How do you have this 9-to-5, this CFO job that's really demanding, that you do so well at, that you want to excel for? And how do you have time to start up this huge, 7-8 figure industry that you're in? That started out as a hobby.
Yeah. So I just want to level set and make sure that, there's mutual understanding for both, all three of us on the call now, and anybody who is listening out there. My wife and I are the ones that, we're the creators and inception of Good Times Collectibles. We are Million Little Details, LLC. The Million Little Details is a reference to my wife, who is very meticulous, very type A, arguably in the good way. Certainly has caused rifts in our day-to-day ourselves, but is definitely part of her personality and has led to her success as a person. So Million Little Details, was an LLC on the shelf. It was an empty shell. Didn't know what it was going to be. We had ideas. And then Good Times Collectibles was kind of born and then placed inside of that box. So I just want to be very clear in that, I wouldn't be able to do what I do as the front man, because don't get me wrong, I am just the front man. That's why I'm here speaking with y'all today. But she's definitely in the back. She definitely has say, and she definitely, helps drive the strategy of our company in general too. So I just want to make sure that's clear. But yeah, so I have a baby boy. His name's Logan. He's 18 months old. My wife is carrying again, and we're expecting our second boy, Liam, to be here in about 4 weeks. So very, very busy at the Good Times household, if you will. The 9 to 5, the children, the wife, the family, the side business. I mean, they are mutually exclusive, therefore needing the exact amount of time they need in a day, which is a lot, right? So it's a lot of effort. Just full transparency. I stay up very late, to do, whether it's securing deals and sourcing, or whether it's closing a deal on sales, packing, to the degree that is the accepted practice, of these vintage collectibles, things like that. I mean, my nights sleeping are probably, 3 to 4.5 hours on average. And that's just the truth. And for me, I mean, it is a sense of pride and like a badge of honor. I mean, I know I need to sleep. You'll die young if you don't get the hours of sleep you need. This is true. But I rationalize it by saying that, I'm grinding it out now, if you will, to set up, an absolute undeniable future for not only my family now, but also, my children down the line too. So sorry, that was a long segue. Let me answer your question a little more directly in this go. My baby boy, who's 18 months old, we obviously knew about him 27 months ago. So I knew I was going to be a dad, as soon as my wife became pregnant. I had a very, very serious moment of nostalgia. I was thinking back to what I liked as a child, growing up in the 90s. The first thing that came to mind was Pokemon. And I was like, I wonder how much those boxes even go for. I went on eBay. I saw, base set boxes going from like $16,000 to $20,000. I was like, oh my God.
And when was this? This was 2-3 years ago?
This was March of 2022. Yeah. And I did some research. I learned that the COVID spiked, they correlated with Pokemon coming back in the scene, right? And prices, also following suit, market values. I convinced my wife to buy a booster box with me. Babe, can I have, X amount of dollars? And she was like, oh my God, this is crazy, but okay, if this is what you need to feel that nostalgic void. I'm like, it is. So I watched Jurassic Park every night that week before my box came, just filling myself up with that 90s. I was watching Nightmare Before Christmas. I'm being silly, but I do love those movies, to be very clear. But anyways, the box came. The box wasn't my box, and I didn't know enough about Pokemon to understand the nuances to it. Long story short, the seller sent me a shadowless box. A shadowless box is easily 6, maybe 5, 6 times the value. So I told you I paid around $15,000, $18,000 for this thing. So the shadowless box is worth, you guys can do the math out there, right? I didn't know it at the time. The seller, I contacted him. I thought he scammed me. I was like, this box does not look like the box that I thought I was buying. He called me immediately. That's a 4-minute long voicemail, which for the record is the longest amount of time the iPhone will allow you to leave a voicemail. And I listened to it and I'm like, this guy's blowing smoke, man. Like, I'm getting scammed. Like, what is even this box I have? I watched a lot of YouTube videos, Rusty, TCA Gaming, various others, to learn about the true variances to these boxes. And I learned that he did send me, in fact, a box, at that time, market value around $80,000. So I had possession of an $80,000 asset from a guy who I didn't know. And, they say possession is 9/10 of the law. They don't just say that for no reason. Possession is 9/10 of the law. There are exceptions to certain things. So, in short, I could have told him to kick rocks, right? But that's just not my nature. It really isn't. And so I agreed to send the box back to him to get the appropriate box at the market value of, $15,000, whatever it was at the time. And a relationship was born. Apparently this individual, who's no longer in the game now, unfortunately, but this individual had a lot of boxes, right? And so I was like, oh my gosh, this could be a potential business opportunity, right? Not only did I do right by this person, but he's now is reaching out to me. We're on good talking terms. Like, I did the right thing by him, and it just turned out to be something that, I could set a business on top of, right? Which my sourcing, has grown exponentially since. I mean, a snowball becoming, a larger snowball, as you become a bigger player in the game, folks come to you, you know the ins and outs a little better. You understand pricing dynamics, you understand the markets across markets, because Pokemon is a very, very asymmetric market. That's the unfortunate reality. I try to bring symmetry of information to folks. Like, I'm not buying for $5 to sell to this market for 500, right? But there are players who will cross these chasms, right, and make a living for themselves, and they can sleep at night, because they understand the asymmetry and they think that that's okay. But for me, though, I try to price my stuff as best as I can, no matter what market you're in. But anyways, that was the birth of Good Times Collectibles. I really enjoy the visual photos and making the reels, and those all take time. But it's been quite a successful endeavor, and I really enjoy the most talking to people. I speak to I speak to somebody who's never bought from me the same amount as I speak to somebody who buys from me weekly. Social interaction is a huge part of my personality, but that just sounds terrifying to me. But anyways, I hope that answers your question about the origin story of Good Times Collectibles.
Don't you just love this guy, then?
It's a fun time already. I love it. Well, I'm curious, Nick, there's clearly a lot of energy and time and devotion that goes into this. I know you mentioned it's because you're setting your family up, and in your view is that you're doing what's best for the people you love and for you as the man in the family. Is there anything more behind this? Is there a inept passion in it? Is there a reason that you really delved into this aside from, the hopeful future? Or
do you mean Pokemon in general?
Yeah, Good Times Collectibles. Your company.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, anybody who really knows me in the collectibles or Pokemon space knows that, it's a business, but it's also very personal to me. And that's not a lazy answer to say, give me your money, let's just keep making me profits in that respect. No, it's not saying that at all. I have a very, I'll say it myself, impressive PC, also known as a personal collection. There are items that, are just never on the table, from my collection that I have found through very interesting people and things that I find interesting. I mean, you can't see my office entirely here, but there's Pokemon stuff hanging up on the walls, uncut sheets, base set packs, sealed. I'm a very big sealed person. Base set packs, sealed variations, old school gaming consoles that I really, really like the Game Boy or N64, like those things are like really near and dear to me. It's that 90s nostalgia. It's funny. I'll really quickly say it. Good Times was it was initially going to be an event space. It was going to be a venue. It was going to be a place where kids could come. There'd be an ancillary antiques and collectibles shop attached to it, affixed to the same building. Very large space, indoor playgrounds, outdoor venue space. It was going to be called Good Times. That's what one of our, ventures that my wife and I were doling through, like what it is that we wanted to do, because we don't want to work for the man our entire lives. We both agree to that. My wife is a lifer at Huntington National Bank, which is a very good size, publicly traded Midwest bank. She's been there for 13 years. So we don't want to work for the man our entire lives. So this Good Times venue was what we wanted to do. But Good Times turned into Good Times Collectibles, turned into what it is today, which is absolutely wild. But, I really enjoy finding treasures, finding things that are hard to find. And that's not to say I have and you don't. It's to bring to light, right? Because I have learned across my short stint, Good Times Collectibles, while it's a going concern, it's only been established for about 2 years now, right? We are new to the space. But it's definitely my ability to speak to folks, interact with them, be both professional, fly out, have discussions, be a person with people as opposed to them being a number or them just being something that you have to push across to get what you want. I stay in contact with anybody, whether or not they still have product or whether or not they can help me necessarily, because I thrive in that. And it's not really a quid pro quo. It's not like one day they'll be useful to me. I just really enjoy knowing about other people's lives, how they do things, how they've gotten to where they've gotten, because I learn from all that, right? And I take that all in, and I rather enjoy it. But finding those treasures, like I'm saying, you asked me if it's passionate for me, it's because who holds these things is, and I'll be candid, old white men. they're the guys that just have this stuff, from the West Coast, working at Nintendo or working at Wizards of the Coast, but they're not on social media, they're hesitant about eBay or these auction houses or whatever it may be, right? But it's bringing to light a lot of those treasures that have been locked away knowingly or unknowingly at times, I've learned, and bringing it to the social scene where folks can enjoy these old-timey 90s things, if you will.
I can definitely speak on the nostalgia as definitely somebody who has a personal collection who's never posted things for sale because they're not for sale. There's something I enjoy looking at. There's something that, gives you that kind of childhood memories of just. Nick got me back into Game Boy, and I remember playing the first Pokemon Red version that came out in, whatever it was, 99 or early 2000. And he got me that one. I'm not going to say the ripple effect that it brought me down, but that's what it is. It's a childhood nostalgia that just keeps going. That some things are never going to be for sale. Nick, as we wrap things up, I'm just curious, what's the goal for Good Times here in the next 5 years? Is there an exit strategy? Like, what are these crazy aspirations here for Good Times?
Yeah. So, it's not a traditional business in the sense of, what's your EBITDA, what's your multiple, a PE firm sign me over, X amount for a check. Because the asset, that the company's biggest asset is who you know, right? And so while you can leave a laundry list of, hey, I used to deal with XYZ person who has ABC things, that asset is anecdotal, it's not hard and fast. It can't just be written off or written over or endorsed to somebody else. And so, because you don't know if that seller is going to want to work with this new person who's the owner of Good Times, et cetera. So, being bought out, that's not really an option, in this industry of what it is that I do specifically. But, the 5-year, 10-year vision for what Good Times, my wife and I talk about all the time. Good Times Collectibles has a lot of success, right? It's because we're able to find these unique things, right? We're able to bring to market the things people have never seen before, which I, once again, really enjoy. But I don't know what it will be. I know that it's not passive. It is not passive at all. I put in so much time, whether it's sourcing, whether it's packaging, whether it's working with people, whether it's untangling, things that otherwise would become disastrous. It's a very active engagement. But my goal 5 years time is to be more passive. I hope that Good Times Collectibles is still, a burgeoning company, but it'll certainly be putting somebody in the managerial seat that I know and trust. But the sky's the limit. I try to be very conscientious of making sure that Good Times isn't like horse blinded into being only a Pokemon, having collectibles store. I venture a lot into Nintendo. I venture into Hot Wheels and there's other things too that, that's to keep it fresh, but it's also just to really try to capture the embodiment of what was the 90s, for me. And it definitely extended beyond just Pokemon,
No pop-up shop, no physical location anytime soon?
No, the physical commerce laws, it is a state by state basis, but once you establish like a physical place of economy or a place of economic commerce, it's introduce sales tax. In this space, whether people believe me or not, I don't make 20, 15, sometimes even 10% margin on these items, right? Once you start to then layer on sales tax, for folks, it just becomes unattractive. You become unattractive to your competitors, right? Because now you're paying a 7.5% premium that you otherwise wouldn't have to pay, right? And so to answer your question, staying, out of the physical establishment is very beneficial to what otherwise is a very competitive landscape in the virtual Pokemon trading world.
We're just gonna have to go to his house, Vin, and look at the collection ourselves so we can get that 90s feel.
You both are really welcome here, absolutely.
All right, we're going to Ohio. Love it. Never been.
It's more than just cornfields and cows. I don't care what people say.
That's right. It's Pokemon cards too.
That's right.
I love it. Well, Shane, should we start wrapping it on up here? It's been a great time getting to know Nick and his Good Times collections. Nick, can you tell I have two things for you here. tell the listeners where they could find you, your company information, give yourself a shout out, and then give one piece of advice or a mantra that you love that's helped you through life that you can share with our listeners. So that's
Sure.
a two-parter.
Yeah, sure thing. So the first piece is, I mean, it's very easy. It's Good Times, plural, so that's with an S. Collectibles with an I, because oftentimes people will use an A. Both are correct, just different context. So it's Good Times Collectibles. Our largest presence is on Instagram. And we have a great reference post for any and all to read. I know Shane Riggs is certainly one of those contributors on that reference post. So definitely reach out, send us a DM. We look at our inbox very frequently. And then the leave with mantra. It's one that my wife rolls her eyes at, but she also knows it's true, whether or not she'll admit to it. Nobody cares more than you. And what I mean by that is that you can hire an interior painter, okay? Call it $20,000 to do every single wall, ceiling, floorboard. And I guarantee that they will paint their home 10, 15, 20% better than they will paint your home. And that's not to say there aren't good agents out there. There are people who will be 99% your agent and will think about it and approach it just like you do. But nobody, aside from maybe your father or mother, will care 100% as much as you do. And so I think just being cognizant of that and knowing that if it's something that you want done right, I'm not a micromanager, I'm not, but at the end of the day, if it has to be done in a very specific way, you got to be the one to do it.
I love that.
I love it. I agree. All right. Well, Nick, thank you so much for joining us here on the 1% podcast.
Yes,
Everybody, Nick's information will also be in the show notes. If you want to find his stuff, you can just click it. It's down below. Don't forget, like, share, subscribe, pass it to a friend. Tell them to buy some Pokemon cards from either Nick or Shane, more preferably Nick because he's our guest. And apparently his deck is way bigger than Shane's. Shane is subconscious about his deck now. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you again on the 1% podcast next time.
See you guys.